So, Rebecca, so great to have you with us. And turns out that I'm not the only Brit in America. So, how long? What brought you here? When did you come to the US?
Yeah, I've been here for 13 odd years, actually. Very odd in many ways. And I wish I could physically be with you guys. It would be so much more fun to be physically in the building with you guys and talking with you face to face. But glad to be here virtually anyway. The main reason I'm here in the US is because I married an American. I married a guy from Oklahoma, believe it or not. People are always shocked by this. They say, "Oh, how did you meet?" And we met. We're both doing graduate studies in the UK, and it's actually really hard to find a proper evangelical Christian guy in the UK. So in the end, I had to marry an American, and he was very keen to move back to the States. I feel like I married the only American who doesn't want to live in England. Yeah. so when I'm talking with American friends, like, I wish I could live in England. My husband spent 5 years living in England. I really didn't much like it. So he said, let's move to America. And I said, okay, given that you don't like living where I come from. And I said, if I hate living in America, then we'll just move to the Azores instead of have a compromise halfway between the two. But he argued to me that whereas if you're an American in the UK, sometimes you can be treated actually a little bit with suspicion. If you're British in America, people are really nice to you. And that has generally been my experience in the last 30 years. So thank you all my American brothers and sisters and friends for just being nice to Brits like us. We don't deserve it. We appreciate it anyway.
Well, I'm so glad. It's a shame. We really look forward to welcoming you here sometime very soon when we're able to travel a bit more freely again. And really look forward to seeing you. And just as the pastor here at the church, he's trying to foster that whole idea of questioning and really testing our faith. I'm just so thankful for your book, and I'm encouraging everybody who's doing Alpha this term to read it and to explore. And so we're so thankful that you're here joining us here at Highland Park Pres, at Peak Street Church, and all the other places. And I hope we're so glad that you're here. And so I'm going to ask you I'm going to switch off my video and going to listen to you. And so thank you so much for being with us.
My great pleasure.
Okay, over to you.
I don't know if you guys can remember back to the time before COVID when travel was a much easier thing to do, but not long before COVID hit, I visited a college in Oregon, a small college over there. And I heard an interesting story about a student who'd been there a few years previously who was studying psychology. And she had got a tattoo on her leg. And a photo of this tattoo that she had posted on the internet had gone viral because it was designed so that if you were looking at her, it read, "I'm fine." But if she looked down at the tattoo from her vantage point, it read, "Save me." Now, this student suffered from depression herself, and she wanted to use this tattoo to highlight the struggles that many people have in our culture today with feeling on the inside like they're not all right, while projecting to the outside that they're fine. Now, I doubt that many people in our virtual room today have a tattoo, though perhaps some of you do. But I'm sure that for some of us, if our actual feelings were tattooed onto our legs, we might find ourselves in that tricky interface. On the outside, we're saying, "I'm fine," while on the inside, if we're honest at times, we're feeling more like, "Save me." The question that we're going to look at today is where is God in the midst of all of that? Where is God when we suffer? Where is God when we feel like we are hanging on by a fraying thread? Where is God in our suffering and in our pain? And for some of us today, that's a question that's been hovering in our peripheral vision. Maybe you believe that God exists. Maybe you even identify as a Christian. Honestly, you feel like you've been crying out to God and he hasn't answered you. For others, This will be the big question, perhaps the biggest question and biggest reason why we don't believe in God. How could a loving God allow the suffering that we see in the world today? How could he allow pain that you've experienced in your life? How could there be a God, as Christians claim, who is both infinitely good and infinitely powerful, and yet allow his creatures to suffer like we do? Today, I want to look at these questions through two different lenses: the lens of atheism and the lens of Christianity. Now, I don't know how things work here because I've never had my eyes tested in the US, but in the UK, when you go to we call them opticians, you call them optometrists, I think. When you're getting fitted for some new glasses, or you have to look through different lenses, and the optician says, does it look better like this or like this? Like this or like this? And I want us to look today at this question of suffering through these two different lenses of Christianity and atheism. Now, you may ask, well, why these two? And here's the answer. Christianity is the most widespread and actually the most diverse belief system in the world. Almost a third of all humans, about 31%, identify as Christian in one form or another. And contrary to popular belief, that proportion isn't shrinking, it's actually growing. In global terms, the main competitor to Christianity isn't atheism, it's Islam. But in the West, and in Europe, where I come from, and in America, where I live now, the competitor to Christianity probably isn't atheism in our minds. It's more a sort of non-religious view. Maybe only a few of us would identify as atheists, but a growing proportion identify as non-religious. And the fact is, when you kind of poke non-religiousness and ask it to be really honest with itself, it's betting on the fact that there is no God, at least not the kind of personal God who cares about your suffering or mine. So in our time today, we're going to look at this question of suffering through the lens of Christianity and through the lens of atheism, and ask ourselves, is it better like this or like this? So let's start with the lens of atheism. If there is no God, then some of our problems are solved. We don't need to wonder why God hasn't seemed to answer our cries for help. We don't need to worry about how he could be loving and powerful and still let people suffer. But we still suffer. And when we take God out of the equation, we lose all hope that our suffering might matter in the end, that our lives might mean something, that our anxiety might one day be relieved, that somebody might ultimately care. I remember a few years ago, I was walking with a friend through a season of great pain and depression. She'd grown up in a Jewish family, but she turned away from her childhood faith in college, and she was experimenting at the time with this meditation. At one point, we were sitting by the Charles River together, and she said to me, despite everything, that maybe the universe had a plan for her life. I really loved my friend, and I had to gently remind her that if there is no God, as she believed, there is no cosmic plan. As famous British atheist Richard Dawkins puts it, from an atheist perspective, the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. My friend was reaching for a placebo to dull her pain. But if there is no God, the talk of the universe having a plan is just that, a placebo. You see, if there is no God, we lose far more than we realize. We don't get a better story where we're on the right side of history and everything will come right in the end. We get a set of meaningless words. We don't get a better chance at universal justice and equality. We get a world in which, as atheist historian Yuval Noah Harari puts it, Homo sapiens has no natural rights, just as chimpanzees, hyenas, and spiders have no rights. We get a world in which, as agnostic physicist and MIT professor Alan Lightman, who works at MIT just down the street from me here, as he puts it, our consciousness and our self-awareness create an illusion that we are made out of some special substance, that we have some special ego power, some I-ness, some unique existence. But in fact, we are nothing but bones, tissues, gelatinous membranes, neurons, electrical impulses, and chemicals. That's you, and that's me, seen through the lens of atheism. Our suffering doesn't matter. It's nothing more than electrical impulses creating the illusion of a thing called pain. With this view of reality, it's desperately sad, but it's perhaps not surprising that people who never attend religious services are as much as 5 times more likely to kill themselves than people who go to church every week. It's not surprising that people who are non-religious are significantly more likely to experience depression. Now, these things can absolutely strike Christians too. In fact, some of the greatest Christian leaders in history have struggled at times with debilitating depression. I'm not for a moment saying that following Jesus suddenly makes your life easy. We'll come to that in a minute. Knowing that your life has no meaning, that your pain or your depression or your anxiety are just pointless neural firings, that you're not fine, but that there is no fine to be because there is no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's what we see when we look at suffering through the lens of atheism. So what happens if we switch that lens and look at it in the light of Christianity? Do all our problems disappear? One of my favorite films to watch with my kids is Mary Poppins. I don't know if you watched it, but I love that scene when she goes around clicking her fingers and the rooms magically tidy themselves. I wish, as a mother of 3, I wish I had that ability just to click my fingers. Is that what Christianity offers us? A way to click our fingers and have all our problems disappear? No. There are some religious frameworks actually that do promise us escape from suffering by disassociating ourselves from the mess of this world. Jesus does the opposite. He says that anyone who wants to follow him must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow him. The call of Jesus is a call to come and die. But after saying that, Jesus made this enigmatic claim: for whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. To see what this means in practice, I want to walk through one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible. It's from John's Gospel, one of the 4 New Testament accounts of Jesus's life. It'd be great. I don't know if you have a Bible to hand wherever you're sitting, whether it's at home or in the church building, or whether you've got a phone that might have a Bible on it. But if you're able to look up John chapter 11, that would be wonderful as we walk through it together. We're not going to read every word of John chapter 11, so maybe afterwards you'd like to spend a bit of time doing that. We're going to walk through a famous story of Jesus' interaction with some individual people in his life. Now, we know from Luke's Gospel that Jesus was good friends with 2 sisters whose names were Mary and Martha. And in this chapter, in John chapter 11, Mary and Martha's beloved brother Lazarus is very sick. Good news. Mary and Martha know the greatest healer in town, and so they send a message to Jesus. They say, the one you love is ill. Now, do you notice how they put that? It's not Lazarus is ill, but the one you love is ill. Look down with me then at verse 5 of John chapter 11, because it's a very strange verse. It goes like this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Do you see how strange that is? If it had said, now Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and so he came at once, that would have made sense to us. Or if it had said, honestly, Jesus didn't much care about Mary and Martha and Lazarus. He was much too busy doing more important things, so he didn't come. That would make sense too. But John tells us that Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and so he didn't come. In fact, Jesus deliberately waited until Lazarus was dead, and then he came. A few years ago, I went through a season in my own life of intense psychological distress. No one had died, but I'd lost a relationship that was very precious to me, and it was devastating. Now, I don't know if you know much about British people. One of the things we're known for is that we really don't cry very much. And that's true of me as a Brit as well. My husband saw me crying in the space of about a month, more than he'd seen me cry in the previous 10 years that he'd known me. And being a good Christian man, one day after we'd put the kids to bed and I was sitting on the couch crying, he came and sat with me and he started reading a Bible verse to me. He was reading from Psalm 121. It's a beautiful psalm. It begins like this. I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. But as he read, I just started crying more. And I explained to my poor, confused husband, I feel like I'm crying out to the Lord and he is not helping me. Perhaps you felt that way. Maybe you're not even sure if you believe in God, but sometimes in distress, you've tried to pray and it feels like you've heard nothing back. That's how Mary and Martha felt at this moment in the story. They cried out to Jesus for help and he didn't come. But that's not the end of the story. Once Lazarus is safely dead and buried, Jesus came. Martha came out to meet Jesus, and she said to him in verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Do you see this woman's faith? Lazarus is dead, and even now she believes that Jesus can heal him. So does Jesus go and heal Lazarus right away? No. He replies, your brother will rise again. Now, both Jesus and Martha were Jewish, and many Jews at that time believed that God would one day raise his people from the dead. So Martha replies, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. But you can almost hear her thinking, what about now, Jesus? What about now? Why won't you help me now? And Jesus looks into the eyes of this desperate, grieving woman. And in verse 25, he says these words, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though he dies, will live. And anyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Martha thinks that her greatest need is to have Lazarus back. But Jesus says her greatest need is him. He is not a means to an end. He is the end. He is the resurrection and the life, and nothing else matters compared to him. If this is not true, Jesus isn't a good moral teacher. He's a fraud. If it is true, then no matter what else is happening in your life today, no matter how you're hurting, no matter how anxious or depressed you are, what you most need is not for your problems to go away. It's Jesus. Martha responds, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. But the story goes on. Martha calls Mary, and Mary comes out and falls at Jesus' feet, weeping. She says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus sees Mary weeping, he is deeply moved. And he says, where have you laid him? So they take Jesus to the tomb. And then we read one of the shortest and most surprising verses in the entire Bible. Look down with me at verse 35. Just 2 words. Jesus wept. Why is Jesus weeping? We know he let Lazarus die on purpose. We know from some other accounts in the Gospels that Jesus didn't even have to be there to heal someone. He could have just clicked his fingers from a distance, like Mary Poppins cleaning up, and Lazarus would have been well again. The onlookers notice this as well. When they see Jesus weeping, some say, see how he loved him. But others say, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Yes. So why is Jesus weeping? In this moment, we see that God does not stand at a distance from our suffering, waiting until we learn our lessons. It's not that our suffering doesn't matter to him. It matters enough to bring tears to the eyes of the Son of God. In fact, the Bible presents suffering as a special place of intimacy with Jesus. Why? Because Jesus suffered more than anyone. You see, at the very heart of the Christian faith lies this strange claim that God himself became human in the person of Jesus, and that he did this so that he could die on a cross to save people like us. For most great leaders, public, painful, shameful execution is not their goal in life. For Jesus, it was. The reality of suffering isn't an embarrassment to the Christian faith, as if Christianity is really meant for shiny, happy people who have no problems. The brutal suffering of an innocent man is staked right at the heart of Christianity. And at this moment in John's Gospel, we see this man weeping with his friends in the depths of their pain. If you are suffering today, Jesus is reaching out to you. I am the resurrection and the life, he says. Whatever you're going through, bring it to me. My arms are open wide for you. I'm ready to meet you, be with you, and weep with you in your pain. But again, this isn't the end of the story. You see, if Jesus was only loving and compassionate, that wouldn't be enough. We'd have a friend in suffering, but at the end of the day, we still wouldn't have hope. But we see in the final move of this story that Jesus isn't only loving, he's also incredibly, unbelievably strong. In those days, people were often buried in cave tombs covered by a stone, and Jesus tells them to take the stone on Lazarus's tomb away. Martha points out the uncomfortable, sort of embarrassing fact that Lazarus's body will be rotting by then. Lord, by this time there will be an odor, she says, for he has been dead 4 days. But Jesus insists. And after praying, he cries out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And John says the man who had died came out. Do you see who Jesus is? He is the one man who can call us out of our graves. My kids are 10, 8, and 2, and whenever we drive past a graveyard, I tell them this story. I tell them that one day when they are dead and buried and their bodies have rotted away, Jesus will come back. And if they put their trust in him, he will call them out of their graves. Miranda, come out. Eliza, come out. Luke, Come out. And when that day comes, nothing else will matter. No grades they did or didn't get. No relationships they did or didn't have. No glittering success or abject failure. Because if Jesus is the resurrection and the life, that's all that's going to matter in the end. If their lives are marked by chronic suffering, physical or mental or both, one day he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That student who tattooed, "I'm fine, save me," on her leg wasn't just expressing the desperation of those who suffer from chronic depression or anxiety, trying to pretend they're fine, when on the inside they're crying out. She was also expressing choice that each of us has as we face the good and bad of this life. Will we say to the God who made us, "I'm fine, I don't need you, thanks very much"? Or will we recognize our weakness and cry out to Jesus, "Save me"? It takes great humility to do this. It means admitting that we need saving and that we can't save ourselves. It means acknowledging that we're not the good people we pretend to be, and that God does have the right to judge us. But it's also an incredible relief. Because you see, if Jesus is who he says he is, then he is the one person who knows us better than we know ourselves. He sees our fears and struggles and anxieties. He sees our jealousy and selfishness and lust. He sees our weakness and our shame. And instead of saying, "Now that I know you, I don't want you," he says, "I know you, and I love you to death on a cross and back. I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though he dies, yet shall he live. And anyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this?